Miscellaneous minds, never explaining the minds. Devilish grin for my alias, aliens who respond. Peddling sin, thinking maybe when you get old you realize I'm not gonna fold or demise. I don't smoke crack, motherfucker, I sell it.
What is going on, everybody? This is the Miscellaneous Minds Podcast. I'm your co-host, Boomer Gato, the cat that hands you your hostility back. Hey, to my right over here is the man Mace Nero, the man that makes the fat stacks. Together we form that dynamic duo that won't die. Damn the ideas, brother, and spicier content. Here goes OnlyFans.
What's going on, everybody? Tonight we're going to talk about a topic that a lot of people have been talking about. We usually like to wait when we talk about these topics just because we want to make sure we give it a little bit of time, that way we can fully digest everything that's out there. Plus, on top of that, we got lucky enough that before we actually recorded the video, an update came up. Now, before we get into tonight's topic, please make sure to like, comment, hate, subscribe, DM us about the bullshit, and with that, let's get right into it. So, my man and I both watched the BBC interview that happened with Andrew Tate. Apparently, this was the first interview he had done, being out of prison. And I'll be honest with you, I have mixed emotions about this scenario. Now, as a lot of you have seen on here, we've been quite critical of Andrew Tate, while at the same time respecting some of the things that he's brought to the attention of the general public that are in fact issues that need to be discussed. With that being said, I guess what happened was the BBC did not know that Andrew Tate was also recording the interview in his home, because the interview was actually at his home. And they put out snippets, they put out clips, they didn't pull out the full thing, they clipped it and sliced it here and there, basically trying to make him look worse than the answers that he actually gave. Now, he put out the full interview on one of his channels, I guess, or an affiliate channel, something like that. And I'll be honest with you, it does paint a little bit of a different picture than the way that the BBC is trying to portray him. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not going to sit here and say that the man comes out looking like an angel even in his own video, but there is some noticeable differences between what the BBC put out and what he put out. Now, here's my beef with that. Listen, you can hate the man, you can like the man, you can adore him, you can think he's the most vile person on the planet. But the problem is when you do this type of thing, where you put out a clipped video, when you put out a video that doesn't portray what actually happened, you're feeding into the narrative that the Matrix is out to get him. You're feeding into the narrative that the news lies. And don't get me wrong, I do believe that the news lies a lot, because they're basically trying to sell you something. They're trying to sell you a narrative. They're trying to paint a certain picture. They're trying to make it, make you think a certain type of way about whatever the particular topic is. So we all know that. But when you do it this blatantly, to where the man can clearly contradict what you were saying, or at least contradict the narrative, I think it makes not just BBC look bad, but all news organizations look bad. It makes it look like you are, in fact, trying to paint this man as just the worst possible human being on the planet. And not just that, but it also gives him credit, because again, he says, look, see, the Matrix is out to get me. Here's the proof. They're chopping my interview. They're trying to make me look worse than I actually am. They're trying to chop up my answers, change them, so on and so forth. So I think it's bullshit that big organizations like the BBC do this, because it does give him credit, and it gives him more power amongst his crowd, amongst the people that follow him. What do you think about that, my man?
There was a couple things about that in the interviewer herself. I'm not going to give out her name because I don't want to. I mean, it's public knowledge anyway. If you watch the video, you're going to know her name. But there were a couple times where she seemed very confrontative, very what's the word I'm looking for? Again, trying to paint very broad strokes about basically his character in a very specific paint.
Hostile.
Yes, very hostile. And there was a point there where she was trying to make a point about it, but she contradicted her own point with Tate making his point. There was a point where she said, there's a bunch of these like organizations that are basically saying, oh, these teachers unions, the police force, organization against sex trafficking, that basically said everything that you exhibit is very characteristic of behavior that's enabling that you're looking to influence the youth, basically encouraging to do the very exact thing that you've been accused of doing allegedly. To which he said, look, you are a danger. How do you reconcile with that? And I think at the tail end of the interview, Tate made some point about being one of the most Googled men on the planet, and that he has this huge influence over the internet. To which the interviewer says, I don't think you're that influential. Which, weren't you just trying to argue that like 15 minutes prior? How do you go about saying that this man that you're trying to argue against is both so dangerous that he can influence a bunch of you to do some very illicit, possibly dangerous activity that you yourself says he is a scourge, and basically influencing a whole bunch of people into doing some pretty illegal stuff, while in the same breath saying, I don't think you're that influential? honestly, like you might be Google, but I mean, you're not that big of a person. Let's be honest. Like, how do you say that to say all these organizations are coming against you and saying you are a dangerous individual, but at the same time, you're not really that big of a threat. Like, what kind of point are you trying to paint with saying that? Is he dangerous or is he not dangerous? Pick one. And I can see they're trying to paint him as dangerous, but they're also trying to understandably neg him a bit. But what's your point with that? That's where I got confused with the whole thing of, all right, how are they really trying to paint him?
And, you know, apart from that one thing, and this goes to what you were saying about the interviewer. So there's a portion of the video where he says, look, I'm doing you a favor, meaning the BBC. I'm doing the BBC a favor by letting you interview me. And you can tell that, visibly you can tell that it bothers the reporter. And whether she wants to admit or not, he is doing them a favor. He didn't need to do that interview, so on and so forth. So you can tell at a certain point, she definitely turns up the hostility a little bit. And it makes it seem like she is, in fact, out to get him. Again, proving his point. Don't get me wrong. I think as an interviewer, I think as a reporter, I think you should try and get the truth out of a situation. And there's a lot of questions that surround this man. So I fully agree with her wanting to be there to get answers, answers to the questions that a lot of people have been asking as far as the sex trafficking, as far as the rape allegations, as far as so on and so forth. With that being said, listen, you're just proving his point. Like, if you were in every situation has to be a little bit different. You can't come off as hostile. You can still be hostile, but you can't come off that way, because then it does in fact look like, at least to his supporters, that you're out to get him. And if you're trying to change the minds of people who are his supporters, you can't give him that energy. You can't give him that type of see, look, she's out to get me. So I think that's where she made a mistake. And again, I know that whenever he said, because he said it a couple times, oh, I'm doing you a favor, I've done you a favor. It seems like she took it a little bit personal, because it seems like she was there to again, be hostile towards him. And it seems like him saying that, he was, kind of getting under her skin a little bit, which, don't get me wrong, I think he was also trying to do. But again, there, you need to give him a little bit of leeway, just because he did grant them an interview. He didn't need to, but he did. So I think it's funny that you mentioned that about her, coming off very hostile, because I think the more that he made that particular comment, the more that she actually got bothered by it. What do you think about?
I think what it all kind of reminds you of is that there was a time where a bunch of newer organizations were up in arms against the release of the film Joker. And they said, okay, with a bunch of these, internet culture, loner types, or whatever, they're going to look to this movie as inspiration and try and draw from that. And they're basically pointing it to the guy that shot up that theater because of the what was that, Dark Knight Returns?
Yeah, I remember that.
The Aurora shooting. And they were saying, oh, it's a dangerous film. It's going to incite a bunch of riots from these loner groups, the ostracized and blah, 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 blah. And then once that movie actually came out, nothing happened. So at what point, why would they try and do that? Well, I mean, as it turns out, the movie itself actually dealt with the kind of thing that Tate was actually kind of talking about it himself. Distrust in the media. The fact that media was trying to spin things towards a certain way, and it turns out it's a complete opposite of what they were trying to point. Now, again, I'm not saying this exactly exonerates Tate just because, okay, the media paints things in a certain light. They're going to paint me in a certain light. To an extent, that's true, but I mean, my man, if you're guilty, you're guilty. They're no matter how much the media tries to spin you, if you're caught doing this thing, there's nothing really the media more can do than just report, okay, he did this thing, he got caught. But it definitely does paint a light of, okay, for sure, we can't trust the media, even if in the end it turns out this guy did it because they had a vendetta to go against this person, even if, again, They did it with the most, what's the word I'm looking for? They did it with the right intent, but they went about it the wrong way. And unfortunately, when you try and hit below the belt, you look just as bad as the person you're trying to smear against. And unfortunately, that's the whole crux of where this thing comes on. If you want to do your reporting, but make sure you go about it the right way, or else you end up making your organization look bad.
There's a certain number of individuals in society that their fan base is just so hardcore and so into whatever that they're selling the world, that the more that you bash that person, the more that fan base digs in. Kanye's fan base, Eminem's fan base, Donald Trump's fan base. We could go on and on and on, man. There's these people that just, you could say the worst possible, and maybe even provide proof of the worst possible things that this person could have done. But the more you bash that person, the more that fan base will dig their heels in and dig their heels in. And I think in this particular scenario, that's what we're running into here. So when the BBC does something like that, where they try to clip and they try to make certain answers look worse than they actually are, or like he's evading questions, or like he doesn't want to address certain things, so on and so forth. I think it just makes it worse because, look, listen, I understand that you want this man to address certain things, but again, let's be honest, anyone in this type of scenario, if you're in the middle of an investigation, of course you're not going to want to talk about it because anything that you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. So, of course, it makes sense that this man is saying, I can't talk about this, I can't talk about this, I can't talk about this. And listen, again, as the BBC, CNN, Fox, all these big, gigantic news corporations, their job is to report to us, the general public, the news, and ideally without any sort of spin. Now, let's be honest, every single one of those corporations puts their spin on it. And that's where I think they lose the general public. It's fucked up because in this particular case, Tate is right. These organizations all try to push a certain narrative on you, whether it's, narratives about, how guns are too dangerous or immigrants are too dangerous, or how about the LGBTQ communities, trying to come after your kids, or so on and so forth. You guys have all heard the different narratives. So when they do stuff like this, it makes it worse for news organizations because you're proving to us that you can't be trusted. When you chip and chop up an interview to get your point across, and it's proven literally probably the next day, I think it was the next day that he posted his full video after they posted theirs, it just goes to show you that you can't trust your organization, and it gives more powers to the Tates of the world. So if anything, BBC, you are really, at blame here because you guys are the ones that should have put out the uncut interview. And I get it, maybe some of the stuff talked about was delicate, so maybe you can't put it out on the news. I know that in England or United Kingdom, whatever the fuck it is, I know that they're a little bit more sensitive with the stuff that can be put on the news. But with that being said, say, hey, look, go on our website. There you can put on whatever the fuck you want. So, with that being said, listen, I think the BBC really fucked up in this particular instance because, again, they try to paint the man looking bad. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying he looked great. But what I am saying is you trying to paint him out to look worse than he actually did just makes it look like he's right. And then it takes away everything you just did. You guys need to be smarter with that kind of stuff. I'm not saying do it. I'm saying, look, just ask general questions. Ask, what you're supposed to ask. According to Tate, they were supposed to ask him about how it felt to be in prison without any charges, how it felt, to be in there mentally, what he did, so on and so forth. And in the interview that I saw, until he said something, they didn't ask anything. And even when he did say something, it seemed like she threw the question at him just like, okay, fine, here you go. So again, don't be so damn biased to where you can't show us the truth. Listen, if he's really that bad of a person, it'll come out. It'll come out. You don't need to do anything extra. Anything else you want to add to that, my man?
I think that's it for me.
All right. Now, before we finish up this topic, the update that came up is, so he's now been actually charged with a couple different things, 2 different rapes, trafficking, a number of different things that he's been charged with. And listen, I don't disagree with him being charged with these things. Again, I guess in the Romanian court, a judge is not going to review the charges to see if they can actually move forward with them. But listen, I'm not against him being charged with things. All I'm saying is let the chips fall where they may. Let things fall for the court system. That way they can go ahead and see what is true and what is not. And that's the number one thing about this whole situation is all we're trying to do is see, okay, this is what really happened. This is what didn't. And here's the thing. As far as I'm aware, the individuals that are accusing him of rape have been anonymous thus far. I think just like in the American system, I'm hoping that in Romania you can face your accusers, because here's the thing. If anyone can anonymously, without ever having to present themselves, just give out a story, to me that's dangerous. That's dangerous for a number of different reasons. And there's been a number of cases here in America, a lot of famous ones, we've previously talked about them, where someone can just make an allegation, and in some cases, some very, very famous cases, look them up, the individual that was accused of doing wrong, specifically of a sexual nature, was unfortunately killed. Not going to talk about the particular cases. Again, we've talked about them before, but please do your own research. Again, these are dangerous accusations to make someone, and I feel like if you can't face your accuser, that's not right. In my situation, the way that I look at it, it doesn't sit right to me that you can't see that person, or at least ask them the same questions that was asked of them to see if the charges could be brought up. Now, with that being said, please like, comment, hate, subscribe, DM us about the bullshit, and
Until next time, get rest and stay blessed. We'll see you on the next one.